Don't need to press record. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Militarized Equipment Ad Hoc. It is Monday, May 8th, 6:06 p.m. Today on the agenda, we are taking up the annual report as well as the addendum, attachment. I forget what we're calling it, but the summaries of militarized equipment usage that have been collected over the last in 2022. Might I suggest that we go over any comments or questions about the attachment first, and then we go to the annual report, or does the other way make more sense? Anybody?
No preference.
Either way.
Okay.
Doesn't matter to me either, sir.
Lieutenant Febble, do you have one or the other pulled up right now?
Yeah, I have we'll start with the see if we can share the Excel spreadsheet here. Let's see, we got
Lieutenant Febble, you saw my note about there were some names in the spreadsheet.
yes, thank you. It's really
Okay.
important. It's really important that we redact that information. I appreciate your assistance on that. It's a big safety concern. Let's see here. All right, can we see everything there, guys? How's that look?
We can see it.
I can see it.
Perhaps we can talk about this document generally. And I also know that there was a question of, sort of whether or not to actually redact names and addresses. Why don't you first talk to us, Lieutenant Febble, about this document and the layout of the document and how it came to be?
Yeah, did it stop sharing, guys?
Mm-hmm.
I think it did. Pardon me. Give me one moment here. Oh. Okay, so this document was essentially the original overarching tracking mechanism that we used. So when a piece of military equipment initially was used, we filled out a form, and that form was translated into this document, of which our assistant has been tracking since the requirements began. So that this is essentially the culmination of those events from the beginning of that tracking period for 2022. Obviously, it's been redacted in order to protect the identities of those involved. In addition to some of these cases are ongoing investigations, and we don't want to have those compromised. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you folks the potential repercussions when information goes out publicly on who may be reporting what. I saw one entry that was particularly concerning. I remember we see this as kind of the spreadsheet was an internal spreadsheet of our own. We had not planned to attach it, but I do see the merits of attaching it. But I literally saw one of them in here where it gave the gentleman's name and his address, and that he was the reporting party for somebody who had a firearm that he was concerned about. And if that information were to go public, it could be alarmingly dangerous for that individual. And the last thing we want is for a public document to go out with people's names in it, because we protect people's right to anonymity for their own safety, with the highest regards of concern. So I had to ensure that this document did not contain any information that would allow somebody to deductively reason who might be reporting, because even if that person's willing to guess, that could have devastating consequences in and of itself for targeting. Obviously, the issue for investigations ongoing, would be subject to any type of discovery. So the requirement, as I understand it, requires geographic location for the law to comply. And this has, of course, geographic location. It's just not very specific to address and name.
Let's start with the first question that I think we saw, which was the spreadsheet starts in July of 2022. Is that when the collection of this information began?
Yeah, this is the first collection of this information that we got and started to be putting in a form from our analyst.
And to the extent that there is anything prior to July 2022, what is there, or what would it be like trying to get it into this document?
I'm not aware of any documents preceding this document. I'd have to follow up with our analyst on that.
Okay. John?
Yeah, I had a similar question about the timing, because the ordinance was passed in 2021. I think it was in June. The AB 41 went into effect January 1st, 2022. And I know also that the armored vehicles have been tracked since sometime in 2021, I think in the first part of 2021, it's even published. And also that patrol rifle deployments are reported internally on a quarterly basis. We did a Public Records Act request several years ago, and it's part of policy that they're internally reported, those deployments. So at least for those two types of equipment, there's no, I can't think of any reason why there wouldn't be an internal record of those deployments.
So actually, Lieutenant Toribio is here, so perhaps you could answer the question about rifles deployments and what are, if they existed prior to July 2022, and in what form. And
Well, I do know that the patrol rifle officers have always kept logs of deployments. They keep personal logs of deployments per our policy. The question is for obviously for the purposes of the date range of this report, everything is contained, to our knowledge, what is within this report and its date range.
Yeah, so for the rifle logs, they were maintained. They've always been maintained. The exact data that was requested, like the full data that was requested from the military deployment stuff, wasn't consistently gathered until July of 22. And so that's when that started.
And do you know why, since the ordinance was passed in the first half of 2021, it wasn't registered until a year later?
No, I don't have an answer for that.
I think the answer is we didn't get case 7 done until August, September, and started working on it in June, May, June. It's not a good answer, but it's the answer. Okay, so Mr. Lindsay Pullen does bring up a good point, which is that armored vehicles deployments were getting tracked in the first part of 2022, and that there is data for patrol rifle deployments. I suppose that brings up a lot of other questions, but the first question I have is that data, let's assume for a second that perhaps it's not. What form is that data in, and how conducive is it to getting into this spreadsheet? That's question number 1 and 2. The next question is, to the extent that there are there is or are records for the rifle deployments and for the armored vehicles. Are those deployments captured currently in the annual report?
So the second question is definitely all of everything from this report and moving forward is all captured. The extent of the information contained, unless Steve has one handy with him, I'm kind of sharing screens and all that stuff. I don't believe that the prior Bearcat deployment was of this technical level. It certainly had the reason for the deployment and the justification for the deployment, but to the extent that it has any of this other information, I don't believe it does in detail.
So for the rifle data, it was captured. There are hard copies in the rifle logbooks. They were reviewed at quarterly training, and they weren't compiled and thrown into a spreadsheet, which is how they were done up until Vision got going again, until July 2020. So it would just take, gosh, I'd have to think about the time it would take just to get the logbooks and then put them in a compilable format from January 21 up until July 22.
It would just be for 2022 period.
Sorry, for 2022. Yeah, it obviously would take less time. I'd have to think about just the time it would take to do that and compile. So again, it's in hard copy format in the individual data books for the rifles. Logistically, I'd have to think about that to know the time it would take to get January 22 to July 22.
And it just as I'm sure the group's aware is that, the chief of police, Darren Allison, he wants me to submit this report by him tomorrow for finalization.
Hmm.
And is there a deadline tomorrow?
We set the deadline tomorrow.
We set it tomorrow. Okay. I mean, the armored vehicle deployments that are online don't have all the same data points, but they have a lot of data points. I think it might be useful just to point people to that. It's I don't have a way of putting anything in the chat here, but I've got the most one from March 2023 up, has the date, time, location, equipment used, and the justification for deployment. So, that's a significant amount of information that is already posted. So it's a fairly simple matter to say, for this piece of equipment, the previous 6 months, and I think it's actually the previous probably 12 months or something, are posted at this particular page. It's oakland.ca.gov/documents/armored-rescue-vehicle-deployment. So it's pretty easy.
I think that's a very smart, very quick solution, John. We appreciate that.
So what I would say about that is that would be a one-liner into the annual report. Well, operationalizing this so that it can be done tomorrow. In the annual report for assault rifles and for armored vehicles, there needs to be some sort of disclaimer that there was additional tracking for the beginning of January or 2022 from January to July. That for a link, as John suggested, for the armored vehicles to where the reports of deployment are, and probably a need for a one-page addendum or supplement, however long it might take, to make sure those numbers make it into the annual report. It may be after presentation, but I think getting it done is And having that information there is important for purposes of this annual report. And it's a lot more work than will be needed in the future, but it will be a lot easier in the future for sure. On that particular note, I would also add that I think what the plan might be, although the annual report is agendized for Thursday, is that there's an initial run through and then perhaps it is taken up again at our April 25th meeting, or perhaps more public input once people have had an opportunity to digest it. Wasn't that the case? I think Chief Allison was hoping for a full presentation by the department on the 25th.
May 25th.
Yes, May the 25th.
I believe he's under the impression that we're presenting this Thursday.
We had talked about presenting it on the 25th, which is when community would be able to come.
I don't think that they would necessarily disagree, but the Deputy Chief Cliff Wong from our Bureau of Risk Management, as well as Chief Allison, were under the impression that it was going to be presented this Thursday. So I have to obviously comport with their desires. However,
it is going to be on the agenda for Thursday. It is going to be presented on Thursday. I just don't think we're going to have an extended discussion about it. And perhaps there is a good chance that it will be also on the agenda on May. I keep wanting to say April, May 25th. I would say that.
It sounds like there will be a presentation, but that presentation is not meant to satisfy the state law requirements around the well-publicized community meeting. Does that sound correct?
Yes. You'll be joining us for 2 meetings, I think, Lieutenant Febble.
That's all good. It's all good. And yes, Chief Allison was inclined for the community meeting at the commission meeting. Not that he wasn't willing to entertain other meetings, but he did like that initial first option.
On the 25th.
He didn't specify a date, sir.
Okay. Because nobody in the community knows about anything related to this for this Thursday.
Right, because there's the requirement for it to be well publicized to the community by the agency, and also the requirement that it be a one where they can discuss and ask questions, which would require some juggling around the Brown Act.
Yeah, I will certainly advise him of that.
So as long as we're on the subject, yes, the reason it's on the agenda for this Thursday is to comply with the local requirements. Excuse me. It will be pushed out on all of our social media, on the commission's social media, after the annual report is placed on the department's website. We are making flyers. We're going to have it in multiple languages, and advertising for the 25th. And we've checked with council, and we do think that we will be able to permit discussion, suspending some of the Brown Act rules. We're going to figure out a way to get it done. Okay. All right. Sorry, I derailed us from this tracking sheet. So we talked about format. We talked about data prior to July 2022. I think Lieutenant Febble just talked a little bit about the need or the importance of redaction. I think he's describing some things that could be exceptions under the Public Records Act requests or under them being publicized. Any thoughts, further discussion on the redaction portion? Okay. I do see a bunch of other notes, Miss Two, that you have in your email. You want to go over some of those?
Sure. Maybe just a quick clarification. When we see PRO, that stands for Patrol Rifle Officer and means that a rifle was deployed. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, super. And then when it says PRO dash number, that's the number of deployed patrol rifle officers and patrol rifles.
Exactly. That's why you'll see that number 300 and you'll see the listed number next to it. Frequently, there's more than one patrol rifle officer on scene for extended coverage.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I think the other question I wanted to check in on was, oh, sorry, two more. One was when I was looking at the addendum, I saw a couple of references to beanbags and less lethal shotguns, but I didn't find the deployment numbers in the annual report. I haven't had a chance to check your updated one that came in today, so I don't know if it might be included there. Or sorry, yesterday, whatever day that was.
I will double check that data tomorrow and I'll see if I can highlight those in there as well.
Okay. And then the only other thing I wanted to check in on were I found two entries that didn't have summary or purpose. Do you want to look into that today, later? What is your preference?
Yeah, are these some of the ones like I highlighted in red that I saw that were clearly deficient?
Oh, that's what the red was. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I recognized when I was like, yeah, this is not good enough. So actually we'll have this finished up tomorrow where we will look into a report and because obviously, yes, we know that we do reserve tango teams who may carry munitions into the field during sideshow. However, deployment is obviously if they are deployed into the field, not just because there is a sideshow. So that's something that we'll address. It's just a matter of reading the reports and then just filling this out accordingly. I think I found about 4 of them.
Got it. Thanks. I had been wondering about the red and thought it was just a coincidence that I was also looking at the same red ones. And then I think that is it for me on comments on the addendum.
John?
Yeah, thank you. So a question just for understanding. The tracking sheet lists incident commander, authorizing commander, and scene supervisor. Sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they're not. Can you describe for us what the distinction is between those 3 roles?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. So typically during our incident command structure, often referred to as the ICS structure, the larger the incident, we tend to delineate roles and responsibilities. So the incident commander is the overarching commander in charge. He's often supported by a tactical commander who's subordinate to the incident commander, and they are typically the ones who are making decisions related to like tactical teams and entries, force options. You'll occasionally have an operations chief, but that is more of a logistics and administrative role. But oftentimes, the incident commander and a tactical commander will be the same person in a critical incident. For example, the one on 5 July 22, you'll see that Lieutenant Worley is the incident commander, and he would likely be the tactical commander too, because he's the highest ranking person there in charge. Sometimes, occasionally, if it does get extended out, it's a larger critical incident, and time is afforded, then especially if I have somebody like Steve on the scene who's highly trained in these types of critical incidents, I'll take the incident commander role where I could, take more time to focus on logistics and resources. And Steve would take the tactical commander role where he could deal with, the incident and how they're going to respond immediately to it. Most incidents absent a larger scale, say a protest or something like that, the incident and the tactical commander will be the same.
Is
So,
tactical the same as scene supervisor?
Well, they could act scene supervisor technically, it could be synonymous with all three. You could be the scene supervisor, which would mean you are the incident commander. You also could be the tactical commander and the supervisor all at once. It's as resources begin to increase is when those get delineated. And I'll let the expert Steve talk on that.
yeah, because I was also wondering what the distinction is from the scene supervisor, but also the authorizing commander. So I understand what you're saying about the incident commander. What is the authorizing commander's role? What is the scene supervisor's role?
Okay, let me see if I can describe in a practical sense how this stuff is categorized and memorialized when we're talking about military equipment deployment. So an incident commander is the person that's in charge of the overall operation. A tactical commander is subordinate to the incident commander and is responsible for outlining how something is done. So for example, the submission here is we want to go up and we want to breach a door for a house in order to gain access for the robot and to open up easier means of communication for anybody inside. The tactical commander is going to be responsible for approving the method under which that gets done. The incident commander is the one who's going to authorize that it gets done to begin with at all. So think about a tactical commander more of authorizing the how something gets done, and the incident commander is somebody who authorizes the fact that something gets done, period. Now, the tactical commander's role is typically going to be focused on the execution of certain things, but there are other things that are involved too. Intel gathering, a perimeter, research into, I guess that falls under intel gathering, but like those other components, all subordinate to the incident commander, and the incident commander is in charge of everything. So the tactical commander is typically the one who sets the hows of how something gets done. So an authorizing commander is somebody of appropriate authority who authorizes the use or the activation of military equipment use. As it applies in these notifications or this data that's gathered, the scene supervisor, how that's reported, it's the field supervisors in patrol who are on scene. So let's say, for example, Ms. 2 is a field supervisor in Area 6, and she's on scene, and I'm the watch commander. I'll arrive on scene, and Ms. 2 says, hey, you know what? I think we need to deploy armored vehicle here. This guy's supposed to have a rifle. We need to protect the team here. Okay, copy. I'll authorize the use of an armored vehicle. In the notification that gets sent out, I'll be listed as the incident commander and the authorizing commander. Ms. 2 will be listed as the scene supervisor. So that's like an example of how people are associated with those titles or categories for military equipment use notifications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. It doesn't say, it says authorizing commander, doesn't say tactical commander, so that was a little confusing.
What is good, sir, is that in the new vision, the 2023 vision, it delineates actually all four different ones. So it does specifically say tactical commander. We did recognize that, and that's already been remedied through the vision update.
Okay. Now there's a number of references in this summary, in these summaries, to sideshows. Obviously, sometimes in a sideshow there is gunfire, sometimes not. There's going to be some kind of infractions or offenses that are described here. But what I'm wondering is to what extent and in what ways crowd control policy is implemented at a sideshow. So because you've got different types of activities and roles of a crowd of people. I mean, there was one in my neighborhood the other day. So I was in that crowd because I came across it. But so I'm wondering how crowd control policy is or is not implemented in a sideshow.
So they're two different things. The department sees them as two different things. So crowd control can be or is typically associated with a gathering for protest, peaceful or not peaceful, and then the associated circumstances that go with that. With sideshow, it's inherent that it's criminal activity. The very nature that there's sideshow it's a crime. A crime is occurring, and those associated with the sideshow are in fact actively committing a crime. It's
Everyone present, you're saying, is committing a crime. The whole crowd, every single person in the crowd is committing a crime.
no, of course not necessarily, but
Okay.
It's
So some people are, a lot of people are not.
I'm sorry.
Some people are committing crimes, a lot of people are not.
I think it's probably the opposite, depending on the circumstance, because it's a tactic that people park their cars and gather and congregate for the purposes of facilitating the sideshow to stop the police from going and stopping the actual couple people who are sitting there spinning donuts. But people are intentionally blocking the roadways, parking along the wrong side of the roadway, parking on the sidewalk, directing observers to congregate and not leave when police arrive, to not create a thoroughfare for police to get to the actual spot where people are spinning. And do people get caught up, like trying to drive home, et cetera? Yeah, absolutely. But the point of sideshow is to gather numbers and bodies and make it difficult for police to conduct enforcement action.
Uh-huh.
I think too, John, something to be considered. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. By default, a watch commander does not just preemptively authorize the Bearcat to go out of the building and drive around just because a possibility or even a sideshow is present where there isn't an active threat. The sideshow gets deployed when there are articulable facts and circumstances that crowd poses an immediate threat to the public. So I do not default deploy it out there. So I hope we made that clear as well.
Okay, so there's a precipitating event or circumstance or action. But when you said the crowd is a threat, I mean, I've seen things where that most people are spectators, most people are watching.
So this is, I think John just froze actually, but I appreciate the discussion. Sideshows are definitely something that are a hot topic. This is not a position that we have. This is a position that we have heard before and have had discussion about before. To the extent that it might be relevant to a discussion, I think it's relevant to a discussion on, I don't know, what exactly the crowd control policy is and to what extent particular pieces of military equipment are being used in sideshows. And I appreciate that is a real conversation to be had, and whether OPD very clearly has a position on how they treat sideshows. We're talking about an annual report today. And so I think there's a time and a place. I don't think that is this particular time and place. I think May 11th could be a time and a place. I think May 25th could be a time and a place. I think every time this comes up could be a time and a place, but we got to crank through this annual report and have it submitted by tomorrow. So I'm going to respectfully, probably not even respectfully, I'm going to shut this down and try to get us back on track to this annual report. Apologies, everyone. Anything else on the addendum, the attachment, the tracking sheet?
Just to note, you have a comment, a hand raised from Ms. Olakbala.
Yep, I'm going to get to it, but appreciate that. Anything for the tracking sheet? All right. I'll allow Ms. Olakbala to speak, and then we'll turn to the annual report. Go right ahead, Ms. Olakbala.
2 points. One, the discussion about individuals who are present at illegal motor vehicle sideshows. According to Title 10 of the Vehicle and Traffic Code, the state of California, it states that any individual who is present at the illegal motor vehicle speed contest, sideshow, and motorcycles or expedition of speed, if that person is within 200 feet of the location of the event, that person is guilty of a misdemeanor. Maximum of 6 months in jail and a fine from $500 to $1,000. And that will be discussed tomorrow at the public safety meeting on sideshows, where the council is moving to fine individuals who participate at sideshows. The other thing I'm concerned about is the document I just saw that represents events where potential militarized equipment may have been present. Are you saying at the Lake Merritt, July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, there was militarized equipment? My understanding that there was blocking of streets, blocking of exits from 580, but I did not know that there was militarized equipment. The issue that was related to that initiative is the same thing that San Jose is dealing with Cinco de Mayo, having the blocking of exits being identified as racial profiling. So could anyone identify, because I want to pursue if militarized equipment was being pursued for participation at a celebration, a special event? Is that the case? Yes or no is sufficient?
Unfortunately, I have not looked into, any of these cases immediately. But of course, ma'am, they're all subject to public records requests where you could get all the data that you would need on these deployments, as all the incident RD numbers are available.
Well, that brings to question, if you are creating data that identifies militarized equipment use, and you have this particular event, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of July, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 2022, as an event for which militarized equipment was used, that means that data is incorrect or it is correct. That's my question.
Here,
Did you
I'll
have
cut it. Hold on. So I think if you're talking about Lake Merritt, and I remember this because I was out there, we're talking about the command posts were deployed to Lake Merritt. And under the government code, the command posts are military equipment, and that's why they're logged.
the military post where you had that large trailer is considered militarized equipment? That's the only thing that was out there.
Yeah, that's considered military equipment. It's not, it's kind of like it's a command
That's the
post.
command center. The command
Yes.
center is militarized equipment.
Yes.
All right, okay, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's,
Would you like me to briefly transition to the other document, sir?
yes, please.
Okay, one moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Just a reminder to everyone that when this annual report is published, that tracking sheet will be available.
Okay, can everybody see it?
Yep. And thank you again, Lieutenant Febble. A lot of work you're putting into this report.
I appreciate everybody's input. Okay, we'll just let you guys kick it off here. I know, so we were working on this when the meeting started. What we're not going to see in here, I was really hoping we're just right now we're outlining very similar to this. We're outlining the cost associated to each equipment. We recognized John's comment last time was that we did a breakout of the amount of money that is being put into equipment in terms of training. So you'll notice that a lot of the equipment, not much of it, like in terms of flashbangs and stuff, we convened a meeting, and the people who use these folks, Steve's teams are highly technical experts. They filled out, best guesstimates of what they feel we would need to replace over the years. So that's why you're seeing kind of quantity sought. For most of it, it's going to be zero, but there are some. So I want to recognize that we put that in there. But the biggest single expense for any piece of militarized equipment, with the exception of maintenance to a vehicle, is actually going to be our training, associated costs to that. And John said, hey, it would be great if you could break that down by officer, sergeant, and in some place I also included recruits, because our riot helmet is trained on during the academy, and there's associated costs to that. However, the one challenge in the metric that I will say is, for example, when you look at our entry team, so our entry team trains, they will have 18 officers, 5 sergeants, right? That's the entire entry team. And so if you do the math, and I based the math on the worst case scenario, top step officer and sergeant pay, just so it's kind of the highest possible cost. We're not undercutting costs. And if you do that, so you got 18 officers at an hourly rate of almost $65 an hour, 240 hours annually is $280,000. You have to add the sergeants in there. Their cost is an additional $90,000. It brings the total cost for the entry team annually to $370,677. Where the discussion, that's easy arithmetic, even I can handle that, right? So where the discussion got detailed was chemical munitions. So we also want to know not just the overall cost of the entry team. We want to know how much are chemical munitions costing us annually. So I'll give you the metric that we used. We spoke with our SMEs like Steve, and they said, hey, for chemical munitions, all types, the officers are training, the PROs are training 5 hours training block annually at a cost of $16,245. The entry team, and again, we have to divide it by officer and sergeant. Okay. The 18 members also for the entry team at 5 hours cost $7,472. And the sergeants, for 5 hours annual training, 10 sergeants total is $3,748. So chemical munitions is going to be documented in the report as having an annual cost of, I think it's approximately $27,000. What unfortunately we couldn't do is we recognize that there's numerous chemical munitions. We simply can't be like, oh, I trained 5 minutes on a CS blast and I trained an hour on a scat blast or an hour on the 40 millimeter. But we know that these are the blocks of training that are associated to each of these groups. And we're going to build that out into this by tomorrow morning. And we even went down to riot helmets, as recruit training is $39.12 an hour. And they have a training block for riot helmets is in the academy is 12 hours. So we know that it costs per academy $11,826 if we base it on the average academy of being 25 recruits. And that also includes the compensatory salary for 2 sergeants during that academy of $1,799. That'll all be in there. And this will be broken out for every piece of equipment.
That's very impressive.
I appreciate your input on it. It was a bit of a lift, but the outline that you guys gave us in terms of like this right here, it makes it pretty easy. So we're going to, I mean, it's a lot of tedious work, but we'll show the salary rates above the chart, and then we'll have officer or recruit, officer, sergeant, and then number of hours, the piece of equipment, and the associated costs to make the arithmetic easier for everybody.
That's great.
Gonna have that done by tomorrow. A lot of math.
Yeah, well, it's gonna be a late night, sir.
I found your explanation really helpful for what was going to get included and how. And I'm hoping that you might be able to include some of that, just so when people are reading this, they have a sense for what kind of thinking went into it, and what they should be recognizing in that number. It might also be helpful to look at some of the requirements from AB 481 about what kind of costs are required, and just make a note of anywhere you don't have that information. Like for I think we had at one point talked about vehicles and how it's difficult for the department to know what the maintenance costs are, because the maintenance and storage costs are borne by the city. And so even though AB 481 doesn't say who pays for it makes a difference, being able to acknowledge of what types of costs we don't have the data for, and what we do, just so it's a little bit more transparent and people can really see what you've put into the into gathering the information that you've been gathering.
That makes good sense.
Was there, did you want to show also what you had done with the uses? Because you also took on the proposal for those additional columns, and at least the version I saw, I think you hadn't populated those columns yet, at least what I saw, but it looks like you have now, maybe.
Yeah, good point. So thank you, Jennifer, also for helping us with the columns. There was a little debate between my assistant and myself, in that I thought last time we said we wanted percentage, but then there was number. I mean, obviously they're the same. I mean, anybody could deductively do the math. What my assistant said, she thought that the very last one was a number as opposed to percentage. Was there something that you prefer?
At a personal level, I prefer a number, but I that's a very light preference, and only for myself
I think my
personally.
assistant agrees with you, Ms. Tu. She wants just a number as well.
Anyone can calculate the percentage based on what's right there. So
Yeah, problem is what the OMC says, because it says the number of days controlled equipment was used and what percentage of those daily reported uses were authorized by warrant and by non-warrant forms of court authorization. I am usually not a stickler for the law, but that's in my day job, not in this job. Maybe where it's not completely obvious, throw in the percentage.
Like in a parenthesis.
Right. So for instance, like when there's only one use and there's only one reported use authorized by warrant, that's pretty obviously 100%. And when it's 0%. For something when the numbers are a little bit different. Sorry, Lieutenant.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, because we know that the armored vehicle would be that would be a good metric for people to judge. Like, oh wow, the armored vehicles used, say X 20% of the time for that, as opposed to a lot of these are obviously going to be zeros or ones. But no problem. We'll take care of that.
So everything on this page, Commissioner, you're saying would not need to have a percentage.
I mean, like, yeah, it's pretty obvious that it's all 100%, right? But or 0%, I guess. Just I guess it's a department choice of whether they want to adhere to the letter of the law or something a lot like it. I'll leave it up to you, Lieutenant Pebble.
Thank you, sir.
Other aspects of this annual report? I saw a addition at the bottom of each one of these boxes. Or maybe it's not an addition, I'm not sure. I think it is. About whether or not it was or was not deployed in the last year. Appreciated that. Wasn't there a question about shields?
Yes, so we had a discussion about that today. Captain Thomason, if you're still on the line, was it riot shields?
Yeah, well, I don't know what the question was from the group, but yeah, we do have riot shields in inventory. I think there's 20 of them. We don't know what the make or model of them are, how much we spent for them, because they're purchased a long time ago.
Oh,
The department.
Lieutenant, the question was about deployments, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why I was asking the captain is just because we don't have a policy, so we don't deploy them, and we have no intention of doing it.
The only issue is that your annual report says they were deployed 7 times.
I think there was, and we discussed this with the analyst today. She had believed, as well as even I did, that the non-riot shield, which is not listed, that was a tracked item when it's actually not. It's the riot shield that's a tracked item under military equipment.
What's the difference? Just so that we know.
So the Steve, you could probably talk more intelligently on it, but there's the riot shields are those distinct, tall, clear shields that you would see. The other ones are a ballistic rated metal shield that is designed to take lower caliber impacts from firearms. But it's the riot shield that's the one that would be used during crowd control that we would write out in deployments, but we have no intention of using those and have not.
Yeah, the riot shields, they're larger shields, kind of like rectangular in shape. I can't remember even what the markings are on them. And the ballistic shields are, depending on the shield, we have 2 different kinds. They're both significantly smaller, and one that is rated ballistically for a rifle round is cut differently, and we have those in stored in the armored vehicle. I think some TAC team leaders may have a shield with them, and so we use those just in the field if we need to, bridge a gap and we're worried about taking gunfire or coming up to a car with somebody who might be armed, and we're trying to make contact, and we'll have a shield with the person up front. But that's not a piece of military equipment, nor are the deployments tracked. As Captain Thomason said, the riot shields we do have in inventory. No intended use for deployment. I can't think of a time where they've ever been deployed.
So that, go ahead.
So I appreciate that you all think that they are not the same, but I want to ask just a few more questions just to have it stated. How much smaller, and to the extent that they are they ever used in a way, or are they only used by the TAC, or what units use them? In what situations are they used besides just protecting from gunfire? Are they used in tactical situations and patrol situations and I don't know, sideshow uses? And are they ever used for entry purposes? And are they ever used to, I don't know. Well, why don't we just start with that?
Yeah, so they're used by patrol. Anything that's inside all the tools in the Bearcat or the ERV or the armored SUV that do not require specialized training and certification, like the launcher or something like that. It's available. It's used in patrol all the time. It's used by the entry team as well. Everything from officers need to bridge a gap down a hallway, and they're going to be single file. So everyone's moving just behind the person with the shield. The shield only protects from the one angle that it is creating a barrier between, and anybody behind it. That's just the makeup of it. In terms of the dimensions, I'm not quite sure how much smaller. I'm trying to think of the riot shields that I've seen in inventory. So I can't give you a number. The shield that is rated to take or to withstand a rifle round, it's very small. Like it would, I'm 5'9", about 170 pounds, 75 pounds. And if I put it wouldn't cover my entire torso. It's pretty small. Like if I held it up to cover my head, it would cover my head and probably half of my upper chest, maybe. The ones that are rated like our soft armor that are rated to protect against smaller caliber rounds. It's a little bigger. It would cover my head probably down to like my stomach or so. Does that answer the questions? Were there any other components of the question that I missed that I can answer?
Sorry, I do that multi-part question stuff too much. No, that was actually very helpful. I think I just wanted to get a sense of perception and when and where it's used.
Yeah, it's used in patrol. I'll give you the context of it because I know I gave kind of a vague, hey, it's used all the time. For example, let's say that during a critical incident, we were trying to go up to like make contact at a door, and we're concerned about somebody inside with a firearm. We'll have somebody with the shield move up and then literally like hold it near a window where the team would be exposed as someone's going to like knock at the door, or if we're going to leave like a phone for communications or something like that. We'll move up so that somebody can safely place the phone at the door while somebody's using the shield to block the window, and then the team moves back. Or let's say we're trying to break a window of a vehicle because it's sealed up and we're having trouble communicating. We'll send somebody up to use a shield to quote unquote block. That's a term we use, block the area between where the subject is and where the person is that's going to break the window. If we're going to put spike strips underneath a car to try to discourage it from escaping, or when it does, it flattens the tire so it has a slow leak and hopefully stops. We'll send somebody up to hold the shield in between where the person is inside and where the officer is placing the spike strip, and then they'll move back. So those are kind of typical patrol applications on when we use the shield.
I think the universal format that we're hearing here is that these are all armed and potentially violent situations is really the time when this device is utilized. So not frequent, but necessary.
Are there situations where these smaller shields are used in crowd control situations?
We don't really advocate that, or like yard searches, anything like that, because it really is best used as like one person's job is to hold the shield. So when we're searching, for example, we all have our firearms drawn because anybody searching can find the subject that we're looking for. So we don't bring the shield because it's really only protecting the one person and at the one angle that the shield is facing. In a crowd control situation, it doesn't really serve a purpose because it's literally only protecting the one person who's holding it. And if there's a crowd, the presumption is that there are people in different places or in a wide space where the angle of a projectile can come from literally a million different spots. So a shield really serves no purpose in that capacity, at least the shields that we have that are for ballistic protection. So no, I've never seen them deployed, and they're just not practical for that type of incident.
And how many of these particular shields does the department own?
I'm not sure. I know that there are some in the armored vehicles, and if I'm not mistaken, watch commanders should have access to them to carry in their cars if they're needed. As a watch commander, I don't have one in my car, but I know that and I can't remember how this, maybe just through training, it was advised, somebody should have these things. So if officers need it on an incident, someone can go out and deliver it. But I don't have one, and I don't have a count on the number that we have.
If it does help, we have so few of them, people tend to steal them from each other.
I'm just wondering if there are enough in the department to perhaps form a barricade line in a crowd control situation in a pinch, really. I
don't, again, I don't have the number, so, I don't know how valid my response is, but in my estimation, I don't believe that we have enough to form a line across a street, which would be a typical distance for holding a skirmish line.
And just cut in, I think that would go against our 3G crowd control policy, because we put a line in there saying that we weren't going to use riot control shields. And if we did, we'd have to come up with a policy on them.
I think I fleshed that out as much as I could. John? Or Jennifer?
So if I understand correctly, then the larger riot shields are what is covered by the OMC, and they were not used. So that portion of the report will be revised to say 0. Is that correct?
Correct, sir. Yeah, and we have no intention of using them either.
Going back to the ballistic shields, would they ever be deployed to a sideshow? Like, it sounded like from what you said earlier, no, but I just want to double check.
So there's a situation where it could be deployed to the sideshow if in the very unfortunate circumstance that there were shots fired within the sideshow and a person went down, and we had one immediately available, which you can see this is all going to be very rare circumstance, right? And we even had a direction of a potential violent subject, because again, as Lieutenant Tribio said, it's a very small device. It only protects a very small area of one individual. All these things would have to come together for that to happen. So 99% chance, 99.9% chance that would never happen. Could it? Yes. Just being transparent, it could, but extraordinarily unlikely circumstance.
Okay, so we have the answer for the annual report. Okay. Other questions about this annual report?
I have a question, though I also see both a hand raised and a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
The question that I had was, I was wondering, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to review this today. I was wondering if there were any recommendations from the copies you got from myself, John, and Jesse, that you decided not to take, just so that way we can be aware of that and potentially discuss it.
Sorry, I got distracted with many things. Was that a question to me? Or was that a question to Lieutenant Feb?
It was a question towards Lieutenant Febble.
Okay.
Oh, I apologize. I totally missed that. What was that, ma'am?
No worries. I was wondering if there were any, we had sent some commented copies with comments and suggestions, both from myself, John, and Jesse, Commissioner Chat, and I was wondering if there were any suggestions that you saw that you had decided not to take, just so we could discuss that. Since
I don't think
I kind
so,
of
actually.
reading.
We pretty much input them all. The only times that something wasn't, say, input was we were trying to keep the report a little more concise for the reader so that they could get a lot more information about each item without having to go from different pages. But we couldn't get the associated training costs built into it because they went off the page. So that was really the only thing that we just did is we built a separate table because we couldn't capture it within the table and keep the formatting.
Okay, super. Thank you.
If there are no other thoughts or questions on the annual report, I was going to take the Q&A in the hand and then and probably give Lieutenant Febble some part of this meeting time to start working on this report.
That would be much appreciated.
But let's see where we're at. John?
Yeah, and on that note, I just want to be totally transparent that I'm hoping to really review whatever revision you send out, if you're sending it out tomorrow, in time for when youth gather on Wednesday evening and are going to be interviewed to make video comments about the military equipment annual report for submission to the police commission. So I have an interest also in this being done sooner, just to be really transparent. But I did have a question too, which is, I'm curious. A lot of the launchers, maybe even all of them, had 0 uses in these 6 months. And I'm just wondering what your reflections are on these 6 months in relation to the use of those types of equipment. Whether it was a 6 months that was particularly quiet, whether it wasn't any surprise, because they're very rarely used. It's only like in the George Floyd protest type situation, or whether things have changed in the department or in policing or in, I'm just really curious because, you go piece of equipment by piece of equipment and you see all these zeros.
I don't know.
Obviously, yeah, Steve would probably be the best to answer that. I'll let him go with that one.
It's hard to say. I do think that our tools are used when the circumstances call for it, but without really looking at a lot of, I guess, different data, it's hard to say.
I think the question in the chat is something kind of similar that the department may or may not have an answer to, which is that if the riot shields have never been used and there's no interest in writing a policy for them, would the department consider letting them go? I would be a proponent of selling them so that we can recoup some money, but anyways, if that
No,
were the
that's a good
case.
question. In fact, Captain Thomason had your same suggestion today in either destroying them or trying to recover some cost. I don't know what the market is for those, but yeah, we are going to be looking into that because we have no intention of using them.
Appreciate that. Hope to hear more soon. Miss 2, Jennifer.
Thanks. In the inventory section, where it says quantity and quantities sought, there was a section around ammunition where the quantity that's currently in inventory was given as the number of cases, but the quantity sought was a numeric number. And I'm wondering if that can, if those can either use the same units or some kind of unit conversion be made a little bit more available.
Yeah, I'll double check those numbers and make sure that they are in fact accurate. I know that we of course buy the case, but I'll double check that.
Yeah, super, thank you. Just because for me, it's hard for me to tell if 1,000 versus like 10 cases, like which is a bigger number. The other thing I was looking at was I noticed some equipment had the quantity sought was a lot more than the current quantity, and I was wondering if you have more background on that. I think it was the flashbang section where I saw that, but it might have happened in a few other places too.
So it's certain devices, and again, Steve would be able to talk much more intelligently on the matter. Certain devices that we learned certainly through protests and things of that nature, that even with our very restrictive policies to utilizing them, which are necessary, we can still find ourselves having to utilize significant quantities of these items, and they're not easily or quickly procured. And so when we had our meeting, I had to basically explain to the team that was giving me the information, the subject matter experts, is like, hey, if things were very challenging this year with regard to whatever circumstances, maybe we do more training or whatnot, and just in terms of use, what do you believe would be a sufficient number that we would request a commission to consider for purchase? And that's what they base that number on. So I don't unfortunately have the experience or expertise to know their internal metric that they utilize, but these guys have been doing this for decades, and they believe that those numbers would be sufficient.
Got it, thank you. The only other thing I had was not quite on this, which is if we should allocate some time today to talk about questions that that John should be bringing to those youth organizers for the 510 event.
Yes, thank you. And
Yeah. Unfortunately, Commissioner Jordan couldn't make it tonight. He really had good thoughts about it, but go ahead, sorry.
well, I wrote to him and asked him about if he could advance any questions, and he didn't reply. So
On the same thought, actually, so Lieutenant Pebble, you sent us a draft. Is the format of that? I mean, it doesn't have all the information, but is the format of that or something that can be preliminarily shared with people so that they know or know what the content of it will be? Or is that something that you'd rather wait until we're done with the final?
I honestly hadn't given any thought. I hate to, like Ms. Chu brought up a good point. If my numbers and my ammunition are wrong, I'd really like to ensure that that's correct. I think that's just a matter of opinion. I mean, if you guys feel that this is going to provide relevant information so that they can ask needed questions, of course we're happy to share it. It's like anything, they would just have to know it's a draft at this time.
John, I'll let you make a decision on that, whichever way you want to go.
But you know what? I can't actually get ahead of it. I'd have to apologize. The chief did require that I submit this through my chain of command first. So I'm actually getting ahead of myself on that. I would not be allowed to until Captain Johnson, Deputy Chief Bassett, and then Chief Allison were to approve it. I apologize for getting ahead of myself on that.
Okay. Never mind.
and do you have an estimated time for when that might happen?
That's got to happen within 2 days. It's got to get to the chief. So I'm required to turn it in tomorrow for that level of review.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering what we're thinking about, given we have this opportunity on Wednesday for getting feedback from young people across the city. Given that we are unlikely to be able to have something to share with them, are there any questions that we could still pose that would be supportive to all of us and to the department?
I don't think it would be inappropriate to say that you have personal knowledge of the report and you recognize that there are certain pieces of equipment that may be used more than others and you can ask their opinion on it. I don't think that that would be inappropriate at all. You making your own personal inferences from the data that you already know is going to be 99% chance will be on the final version.
I mean, the thing is, in an 80-page report, there's no way to help someone who hasn't seen it before really absorb it. Right? So we're already in the position of trying to summarize information. So my, and I've already, shared with some people, okay, well, the Bearcat was deployed so-and-so number of times in the 6-month period. And there was, such and such a number of patrol rifle deployments. I didn't think that that was a restricted piece of information. I wasn't sharing the document itself, but and the document has been up in a public meeting. We're in a public meeting right now. So I kind of think that, we need to, like Jennifer said, we have this opportunity to hear from youth, but asking them questions without information is not a very fruitful way to go. So, because you kind of have to tell them something and then ask them something about it. I think. Otherwise, they're responding to their own experience, but they're not responding to the report. Anyway, so that's going to require not the level of detail that we've been working on here, but some kind of summary information to share with people. Which
I
we
would
can
say,
do.
John, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, these are public meetings that are recorded. I don't know what the turnaround time for the recording is, and the Oakland Police Department doesn't dictate the turnaround time for that information. And if this report gets published, although everybody knows in this recording it's a draft, but if it gets public, put on the website tonight and everybody can review it, then that's the inner workings of the city. That's not in the control of the department. And I would have no say in that matter.
Let's perhaps we should take it at a different tack. I understand that this community engagement meeting is likely to be in response to the annual report that is submitted. I understand that it certainly that one of the things that we want at such a meeting is for people to react to the annual report, right? To react to the number of times that patrol rifles were deployed, for instance, because that's the example that's on the screen. React to the number of times that explosive breaching was used, which was none, shields, helmets, etc., and to make comments about it. I think very generally they can, and those are tiny little bits of information perhaps that can be shared with youth if you just go through the document and say, in your area, in area 1, rifles were deployed 19 times, or this particular rifle was deployed this many times. How do you feel about that? On the other hand, the meeting is also an opportunity to sort of take the collective experiences of people who maybe don't really care about an annual report, but want to be able to tell the commission and tell a public body and have the department hear about what their experiences have been in the last year with any of the pieces of military equipment that are under this particular purview, and how it makes them feel about a couple of things: public safety in Oakland, the police, the militarization of police in Oakland, or lack thereof, whether they feel like there should be more, whether they feel like there should be less, whether they feel, I know that one of our current viewers right now is a big proponent of the police getting whatever they need to do their jobs as safely as possible. I think these are all things that will be useful both for the commission as well as the department in making determinations of acquisitions and whether to keep or not keep pieces of equipment, which is kind of the end game, right? And whether the governing body should continue to authorize these pieces of equipment. Those are general topics that I think that perhaps would be helpful at a community engagement meeting, as it pertains to the annual report and where I see this going on a yearly basis. How we distill that into questions that are digestible for our youth so that you can get good feedback. I would say get them to start thinking about their own personal experiences or what they know, who they've talked about, and how it makes them feel. Because there are probably many who have experienced some form of it or know someone who has. Jennifer?
If we are, I like your idea, assuming that we are all okay with hearing the comments and responses that are not going to be responding directly to what's in the report. And if that's the case, then I think this could work. One thing I'm doing is I'm going back to the state law and looking at the what the governing body is required to do around the policy, right? The governing body is only supposed to approve a military equipment use policy if that governing body determines that A, the military equipment is necessary because there is no reasonable alternative that can achieve the same objective of officer and civilian safety, and B, the proposed military equipment use policy will safeguard the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties. And so I could see forming questions that ask people to respond to those very directly, and really focus it in on what the governing body is required to evaluate as part of deciding whether to approve or renew approval of a military equipment use policy.
I would not word it in the way the statute has worded it, but yeah, I would agree. Also remember that this is a community engagement meeting for the department. So to the extent I am sure that the department wants to know how people feel about the equipment that is used and ways in which it could be used in a more just and equitable way. Maybe something to put into policies and consider putting into policies and procedures to make less of an impact of the use of the militarized equipment. I don't know what that is, but I'm thinking of situations where I've had clients who talk about how when a search warrant is executed, the aftermath of it, and how the aftermath is probably more upsetting than the actual fact of the search warrant, and thinking about where the impact is felt by youth or all members so that we can think about how we might mitigate those impacts. That's a pretty broad swath of questions. That could get you started. Anything from the department, things that you would like to hear from your community about?
No, I mean, I think that we just got to be open-minded to the opinions of everybody involved. Feedback's important, both positive and negative. It's all about assimilating the needs of the community, and you need to have meetings like this sometimes for tough answers to tough questions, and we look forward to being a part of it.
And I think that was great. I mean, there's lots of questions that you all just articulated that I think we can use on Wednesday evening too.
Any other comments, questions about the annual report? And it's at this point, the formatting, the language, what the law requires. If not, what I'll probably do is take Ms. Olugbala's hand and then wrap up. Ms. Olugbala, you're up.
Yes, I'm wishing that the report could have had the potential for demonstrating misuse of militarized equipment. So we got data on when the equipment was used or deployed based on numbers and warrants. But the key essential thing is to avoid and to hold officers accountable if there's any misuse of that equipment. And I don't see that potential if you're not able to collect data that reflects abuse or misuse. So does that process exist except when a person files a complaint, maybe, I don't know. But the report doesn't reflect that. The other thing is the report should reflect what was the other thing? It had something to do with the use of the equipment when it's for the protection of the officer. Because I know you guys want to concentrate on militarized as it can be abused, but it can also be called protective equipment. You choose to use militarized only. So is it important or it's not important to give data when the equipment was used? It helped to protect the officer. Lastly, you gave numbers of cost related to the militarized equipment. I hope at some point you'll be able to look at the budget because they're doing a lot of cuts in the police department. And the sideshow agenda item specifies that the reason that they're going to create potential ordinance to hold spectators accountable is because of the unmanageable crowds is one of the reasons. Discharge of firearms by the participants in violent crimes. Now, these are mostly people ages 18 to 25, young people. Does the militarized equipment annual report distinguish anything related to minors and using that equipment, and specificity of, in the case of young people, anything around because it's a minor? You say you're going to be meeting with the youth. Are we developing in this policy guidelines for when we have to be engaged with children, just like the King of State school situation where that involves students? And that's the only thing I'm concerned about. But I need to see where the equipment was misused. Is there any data on that?
I was going to allow John to speak first, but yes, Ms. Olivella, a lot of great points you bring up. Absolutely, we capture the data of complaints directly associated to militarized equipment. We have a very robust system developed in our vision system moving forward for the 2023 report that will directly link militarized equipment to IED, CPRA complaints. And to your point of the use of the equipment, all militarized equipment that is being used, we shall document the reasons and circumstances that leading up to the use of that equipment and then the reasons behind it. And the new vision system will actively catch all of the demographic data to include the age of the individuals the equipment was directly used on as well.
So that'd be age and race as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add to that, Ms. Olubala, that I'm really glad you're here because you're so knowledgeable and there in earlier meetings of this ad hoc committee, we developed some policy that addresses the use of militarized equipment with vulnerable populations. So that includes minors, people who are medically vulnerable, people who don't speak English as a first language, people who have maybe facing a mental illness. I think there's a couple other categories of people who are vulnerable populations. So what Lieutenant Thewel says about capturing that demographic information should be recorded going forward. In the spreadsheet that was shown near the beginning of this meeting, there's some information in there. It's not demographic information, but it could help one understand better the circumstances in which the equipment was used, whether it was to protect officers, whether it was in a situation that might lend itself to abuse. So that there'll be more context in that document, which will be released along with this report as well.
I have one other concern. Can I share that with you, please?
Let's do it.
Okay, on April 17th, I exit from High Street on 580. Between Seminary and High Street on MacArthur, there was a deployment of several officers and militarized armor gear, rifles on roofs of buildings. The situation is I drove past all of this, helicopters in the air, and I'm assuming they were looking for someone. And in that situation, why wasn't the road blocked off? Because at the point I drove by, if the individual they were pursuing would have came into view, I could have got caught in the crossfire. And I just want to say that a part of the militarized equipment is the making sure that you protect public from being involved in what they call friendly fire or crossfire. Yeah, I was very upset. That was April 17th. I was on my way to the church meeting. But anyway, is there a system of, because you're using this kind of equipment, you have to make sure that the public is eliminated from being a victim of the use of the equipment?
Yeah, absolutely, Ms. Alabala. So that's defined in our patrol procedures manual, and part of our training, that one of the very first things we're supposed to do is isolate and contain through a perimeter.
They didn't do it.
And I wasn't there for that incident, but and then also, of course, DGO K4 establishes guidelines with regard to use of force, and equally important, debriefs. We're not a perfect entity. We do make mistakes, and that's why at the end of critical incidents we hold briefings to talk about what went well and what didn't go well and how we can improve in the future. There's always room for improvement.
If I may, just to kind of, I mean, I don't know this incident on April 17th, but to give you some context of how we conduct operations and how things may be perceived in the field as well. When we're looking for somebody, we typically try to establish containment via a perimeter. And depending on the number of resources that we have, we try to have multiple perimeters, an inner and an outer. And an inner would be most directly the area where the person is. So for example, it's a house at 123 Happy Street. We'll try to set an inner perimeter around all sides of the house, probably in the adjacent yards. And that would be considered the inner perimeter. And then the outer perimeter would typically be the intersections of the neighboring blocks that encompass like where this person might be able to flee and then start running through yards. And resources that we have or teams that we'll set up will be like a dedicated arrest team, which will likely be in front of the location of interest. And then we'll have blocking forces set in different areas as well. And we'll have overwatch units, which could constitute what you see people on roofs. So you may be driving through an area where you'll see officers with rifles deployed, or where you'll see pieces of military equipment like the armored vehicles. And they may be staged there. They may be there like on outer components or outer areas of where the scene is. And those streets we won't, unless there's reason to, close off entirely, because we also want to minimize the impact of stopping people from getting where they need to go. So that may be why. And again, I don't know the incident that you were on, so that may explain why you were still able to drive around. And the spot that the officers were focused on may have been a much smaller location, but the footprint of the entire incident kind of expanded additional blocks. And that may be why you saw kind of officers in the positions that you did, and you were still able to drive through. But by and large, when we're conducting these operations, we try to establish multiple levels of containment, and we do exclude people from going through what we would consider like an extremely dangerous or a hot zone.
I was directly in front. The building was right next to my car, and people on the top. But anyway, appreciate you trying to give me an explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olenbaugh. All right. With that, let's not delay Lieutenant Bevel getting to work on this report tonight.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your input and your help. I appreciate it.
Look forward to it. Thank you for all your work. Thank
Yeah,
you,
thanks for all
everybody.
your hard work on this.
Yep, thanks. Take care.